All right, we're back and ready for another deep dive. This one really hits close to home for a lot of people.
Oh, absolutely.
It has to do with, well, it gets pretty personal, actually.
Yeah.
So we're going to be looking at an Indian Supreme Court decision that really clarifies where a wife can file a complaint.
Okay.
Of cruelty under Section 498A of the Indian Penal Code.
Section 498A, this is all about protecting women.
Yes.
From cruelty.
Uh-huh.
By the husband or relatives of the husband.
Exactly. And, you know, this case, Rupali Devi v. State of Uttar Pradesh, from 2019, it tackles this really tricky question about jurisdiction. So just imagine this. A woman, she's experiencing cruelty at her matrimonial home.
Right.
And she leaves for her own safety, goes to stay with her parents. Now the question is, does she have to go back to that place?
Yeah.
Where the cruelty happened to file her complaint? Or can she file it where she is now?
Right at her parents' home. It's a question that has actually divided the courts.
Oh, really?
Leading to a lot of uncertainty for women in those situations.
So what were the arguments on each side of this?
Well, some courts, they took a very strict view. They wanted to just stick to that general principle.
Okay.
That you try a case where the crime occurred. So they argued that if the cruelty happened at the matrimonial home, that's it.
Got it.
The complaint has to be filed there.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, on its face, that's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
What was the counter argument to that?
Well, the other side said, hold on, you can't just be so rigid.
Right.
Because cruelty, you have to think about the consequences.
Okay.
They can extend beyond the initial location of the abuse.
Yeah.
Imagine a woman emotionally scarred.
Yeah, the trauma doesn't just disappear.
It follows her wherever she goes.
Exactly. So how did the Supreme Court try to settle this? And Rupali Devi, what was their take?
They did something interesting. They looked beyond the strict interpretation of where a crime occurs, and they focused on the consequences of that crime.
Okay, so help me unpack that a little bit. What do you mean by focusing on the consequences?
Well, they basically said that the ongoing trauma, what a woman experiences.
Yeah.
As a result of cruelty. It's a distinct offense in itself.
Okay.
And it happens wherever she's currently residing. It's like the court is saying, we recognize that the harm, it doesn't end just because you've moved.
Just because the victim has moved.
To a different location.
So in the case of Rupali Devi, they're saying that her emotional distress, even though it stemmed from the cruelty at the matrimonial home, is a continuing offense happening at her parents' home.
Precisely.
Okay.
And that was a big change because it gave the courts, right where she was staying, to jurisdiction to hear her complaint under Section 490AA.
That seems like a huge step towards making the system more, accessible,
yes, absolutely,
responsive to women facing these kind of situations. It's like you don't have to go back to that place.
Yeah, that potentially dangerous environment.
Just to seek justice.
Just to seek justice, exactly. And, this sets a precedent for, how courts might interpret jurisdiction in other contexts where maybe the harm caused by an act continues to affect the victim long after the initial incident.
So it's this idea of consequences as a factor in determining jurisdiction.
Right.
That's really powerful.
It is.
But I mean, this idea, I'm sure it didn't just come out of nowhere, right? This had to have existed before Rupali Devi. Weren't other courts already kind of wrestling with this?
Yes, it wasn't completely brand new.
Okay.
But Rupali Devi provided that much needed clarity.
Okay.
And it really established a more consistent approach because there were previous cases.
Yeah.
Where courts took a more restrictive view of jurisdiction.
Can you give us an example of one of those cases where they took a stricter approach?
Sure. Like why Abraham Ajith.
Okay.
Where, again, you have a wife who left the matrimonial home.
Okay.
Due to cruelty. She filed a complaint under 498A where she was staying, again, with her parents.
Yeah.
But the court in that case, they said no.
Okay.
Because there are no, specific allegations of cruelty happening at the parental home.
Right.
It has to go back.
Yeah, okay.
Where the matrimonial home was located.
So even though she was experiencing those consequences at the parental home, they didn't consider that enough.
Didn't consider that sufficient.
To establish jurisdiction there.
Right.
Wow, that's such a different approach than Rupali Devi.
Very different. And that's why Rupali Devi is such a landmark decision.
Yeah.
It signaled the shift.
Yeah.
Legal thinking moving towards a more victim-centric approach.
Okay.
Acknowledging the ongoing impact of cruelty.
So then, you mentioned that there were also cases that took a broader view of consequences, even before Rupali Devi.
Yes.
Can you tell us about one of those?
Yeah. So in the Sunita Kumari Kashyap v. State of Bihar, the court took a much broader view of consequences.
At the husband.
In this case, he hadn't done anything specific at the wife's parental home.
Okay.
But his failure to check on her well-being.
Okay.
Or respond to her attempts to contact him were seen as contributing to her distress.
So even though he wasn't physically present at her parents' home, his actions, or rather inaction, right, were still considered to be having consequences.
Exactly. The court recognized that, emotional neglect, abandonment could be just as harmful as physical abuse.
That's an interesting way of looking at it.
Yeah.
So those ongoing consequences, even though it wasn't like a physical act, were sufficient to establish jurisdiction where the wife was staying.
That's right.
Wow, that's a really significant step towards, recognizing the full range of harm that can occur.
Yeah.
It sounds like, Sunita Kumari Kashyap was laying the groundwork for Rupali Devi.
Absolutely. It's a great example of how those legal precedents, build upon each other, gradually expanding our understanding of these complex issues.
Yeah.
Like domestic violence and jurisdiction.
I'm already seeing how much nuance there is to this topic. So we've got Y. Abraham Ajith taking a narrower view, Sunita Kumari Kashyap taking a broader view.
Yep.
And then we have Rupali Devi really solidifying this idea.
Yes.
That the woman's experience of ongoing trauma can establish jurisdiction wherever she seeks refuge.
That's a great summary. And it's really fascinating. There are even cases where the consequences manifested physically.
Oh, okay.
And even though that initial act of cruelty happened elsewhere.
Oh, tell me about one of those cases.
There's a really heartbreaking case of State of MPV Suresh Kaushal.
Okay.
The wife, in this case, suffered a miscarriage.
Oh, wow.
At her parental home due to the cruelty she endured at the matrimonial home.
That's devastating.
Yeah.
So even though the physical consequence, the miscarriage happened at the parental home, the court linked it back.
They did. They linked it back
to the abuse that occurred earlier.
Exactly.
Wow.
The court recognized the miscarriage as a direct result of the cruelty and used that to establish jurisdiction in the course where she was staying at the time.
This is powerful stuff. It seems like these cases are really pushing towards a more holistic understanding of harm, recognizing that the consequences of cruelty, they can be so far-reaching and long-lasting.
And that's what makes Rupali Devi so important, because it takes all of those threads, the concept of consequences, the recognition of emotional and psychological harm, the need to provide a safe and accessible path to justice. It weaves them together into such a clear and impactful decision.
It's like Rupali Devi provided that missing piece of the puzzle.
Right.
We see these earlier cases sort of grappling with these ideas.
Yeah.
And then Rupali Devi comes along and says, this is how we're going to approach this issue from now on.
Yes.
It really sets a powerful precedent.
It does. And it raises all sorts of interesting questions about how this broader interpretation of consequences might impact other areas of law. Could this reasoning be applied to other types of offenses where the harm continues even after the victim has left a particular location?
Now that is a thought-provoking question.
It is, isn't it?
We're definitely going to have to explore that further.
Yeah.
But before we do, I want to make sure our listener really understands, the significance of Rupali Devi in the context of Indian law.
It's a landmark decision, no doubt about it.
But it's more than just a legal victory.
I think so, yes.
It's a reflection of a larger kind of societal shift in how we understand domestic violence.
You're absolutely right. The introduction of Section 498A itself back in 1983, that was a major step forward.
Okay.
In recognizing and criminalizing cruelty against women within a marriage.
Yeah.
And then the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act in 2005, that broadened the definition of domestic violence to include not just physical abuse, but also emotional, verbal, economic abuse.
It's like the law was catching up to the lived experiences of women, acknowledging that violence doesn't always leave, visible bruises.
Absolutely.
And it seems like, cases like Rupali Devi show that this evolution is continuing.
Yes.
There's a growing awareness of the complexity of domestic violence and a commitment to providing victims with meaningful legal protections, a clear path to justice. Right. I find that incredibly encouraging, but we've covered a lot of ground already.
We have.
And we've only just begun to scratch the surface of this fascinating topic.
It is fascinating.
I'm eager to dig into some of the other cases that you've provided and kind of explore those broader implications you mentioned.
Sounds good. I'm ready to dive deeper as well. That's where it gets really interesting.
I think you're right.
As we've been discussing these cases, it strikes me that the courts aren't just looking at the law, in a vacuum.
Yeah.
They're really trying to understand the spirit behind it. The intent of lawmakers to protect women from all forms of cruelty.
That's such an important point, yeah. It's not just about the letter of the law, but ensuring justice for those who are the most vulnerable.
Exactly. And one of the ways they do that is by considering the broader context of the law.
Yeah.
For instance, in Rupali Devi, the court looked at other legal provisions. And even delved into the legislative history of Section 498A.
What kind of insights did they gain from that?
Well, they referenced the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act of 2005, which was a landmark piece of legislation in India. And that act broadened the definition of domestic violence to include not just physical abuse, but also emotional,
verbal, and economic abuse.
It's they're saying, look, there's a pattern here. The law is moving towards a more comprehensive understanding of violence against women.
Yes.
And we need to interpret Section 498A in light of that.
Precisely. And they also highlighted how the definition of domestic violence in that 2005 Act aligns with the concept of cruelty under Section 498A. Both emphasize the harm caused to a woman's mental and emotional well-being. Not just her physical safety.
So it's not enough to just stop the physical violence. The law is saying that we need to consider the full spectrum of harm. The unseen scars that abuse can leave behind.
And that's why the court in Rupali Devi emphasized the importance of understanding that, a woman's silence can sometimes be a sign of emotional distress and mental agony.
So many ways that abuse can manifest.
So many ways.
And the courts are becoming more attuned to those subtle signs. Absolutely. And that's a powerful message to send to survivors of abuse. It tells them that the legal system is there to protect them, not to dismiss their suffering.
I'm curious, though. We've been focusing a lot on the positive aspects of Rupali Devi and how it expands access to justice. But were there any concerns raised about this broader interpretation of consequences? Did any courts express reservations about?
There were some dissenting opinions and concerns. That such a broad interpretation could lead to a situation where any negative event in a wife's life after leaving her matrimonial home could be attributed to the earlier cruelty. Even if there was no direct causal link.
So there's a fear that this could be misused or that it might be difficult to determine where the line is drawn.
Exactly.
Not every hardship a woman faces after leaving an abusive relationship can automatically be attributed to that relationship.
Exactly. There's a need for careful consideration and a nuanced understanding of the facts in each case. But overall, the court seemed to be moving towards a more balanced approach. Recognizing the importance of protecting women from cruelty. But also ensuring fairness. In the legal process.
It sounds like a delicate balancing act.
It is.
But it's encouraging to see that the courts are engaging with these really complex issues and trying to find solutions that truly serve the needs of women who are experiencing abuse.
It is. And it's a reminder that legal progress, it isn't always a straight line. There will be setbacks and disagreements. But the important thing is that the conversation is happening and the legal system is evolving to better protect the rights of those who need it most.
Well said. I'm really struck by how these cases reveal the human side of the law. We often think of legal decisions as so cold and impersonal. But these cases are about real people, real lives. And the very real impact of violence and cruelty.
I completely agree. And I think that's why it's so important to have these open and honest conversations, about these issues. we need to shed light on the complexities of domestic violence,
Right.
the challenges survivors face, and the ways in which the legal system can both help and hinder their pursuit of justice.
It's about bringing those lived experiences into the courtroom.
Exactly.
Making sure that the voices of those who've been silenced by abuse are heard and acknowledged.
Right.
And speaking of voices, we haven't really touched on the voices of those accused of cruelty under Section 498A. What perspectives did the courts consider from their side?
That's a crucial point. The courts have recognized the need to balance the rights of the complainant with the right to a fair trial for the accused.
Okay.
Some have expressed concerns that, Section 498A could be misused to harass or falsely implicate husbands and their families.
So it's not just about blindly accepting every accusation. It's about carefully examining the evidence and ensuring that the legal process is fair and impartial.
Precisely. There's a delicate balance to strike between protecting women from abuse and safeguarding the rights of the accused. And the courts are grappling with that challenge, trying to find ways to ensure that justice is served.
For everyone.
For everyone involved.
Yeah, this has been so eye-opening. I feel like I'm starting to grasp this intricate web of legal arguments and societal values and personal experiences that are woven into these decisions.
It is a complex web.
Yeah.
And we've only just begun to untangle it.
Right.
But I think it's important to remember that, behind all the legal jargon and procedural complexities, there are real people whose lives are profoundly affected by these decisions.
That's a powerful reminder. We can't lose sight of the human cost. And the violence and the importance of creating a legal system that truly protects the vulnerable and upholds the principles of justice and fairness.
Right. And that's where the concept of consequences becomes so crucial. It forces us to look beyond that immediate act of cruelty and consider the long-term impact on the victim. The ripple effects that can extend far beyond that initial incident.
It's about recognizing that justice isn't just about punishment.
It isn't.
It's also about healing, restoration.
Yes.
And ensuring that survivors of abuse have the resources and support they need to rebuild their lives.
Absolutely. And that's why cases like Rupali Devi are so significant. They represent a step towards a more compassionate and understanding legal system. One that acknowledges the complexities of domestic violence and seeks to provide meaningful protection and redress for those who've been harmed.
This has been such an insightful conversation. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of this fascinating topic.
It is.
Are there any other aspects of these cases that you think our listeners should know about?
One thing I find particularly fascinating is how these cases are starting to touch upon the intersection of technology and domestic violence.
Oh, wow. Okay.
We live in a world where abuse can now happen online. Through social media, constant texting, cyber stalking.
Yeah, it's like we need a digital equivalent of Section 179, right? Something that addresses the consequences of online abuse that might be felt far beyond the physical location of the abuser.
It's definitely a new frontier for the law, and the courts are just beginning to grapple with these challenges, you know? How do you apply these traditional jurisdictional principles in a world where the lines between physical and digital spaces are becoming increasingly blurred?
Yeah. How do you determine where the harm occurs when the abuse is happening online?
Exactly.
It's like the law is playing catch up.
Yeah, it is.
So much technology.
But I have a feeling that the principles we've been discussing today, this focus on consequences, the recognition of emotional and psychological harm, the commitment to providing a safe and accessible path to justice will continue to guide the courts as they navigate this new landscape.
I agree. The fundamental principles of justice and fairness are timeless.
Yes.
Even if the specific challenges we face are constantly evolving.
They are.
And it's encouraging to see that the courts are willing to adapt and innovate to ensure that the law remains a relevant and powerful tool for protecting the vulnerable in our ever-changing world.
Right. This has been such a thought-provoking conversation.
It really has.
And I feel like I have a much deeper understanding
me too.
of this complex area of law.
Yeah. But before we wrap things up, I want to make sure we leave our listener with something concrete to take away from this deep dive.
What stands out most to you? What do you think is the most important takeaway for our listener?
Well, for me, it's the power of precedent. You know, we've seen how these earlier cases, even the ones with like different viewpoints, paved the way for that landmark decision in Rupali Devi. It shows how like legal thinking evolves.
It does.
And how the courts can become more responsive to the needs of society.
It's like building a legal edifice, you know, brick by brick.
Yeah.
Each case adds another layer of understanding.
Yeah.
And sometimes a case like Rupali Devi comes along.
Right.
And it redefines the entire structure.
It's inspiring to see how those incremental changes can lead to such significant progress.
They can.
In protecting the rights of, you know, those who are most vulnerable.
And it's a reminder that the pursuit of justice, it's an ongoing process. You know, we can't be complacent.
Right.
We need to keep pushing for progress, keep challenging those outdated interpretations, and keep demanding that the law, it keeps pace.
Yes.
With the changing realities of our world.
That's like what we were just talking about with technology.
Right.
And online abuse, right?
Exactly.
The law has to adapt to these new challenges and find ways to protect victims in those evolving spaces.
Absolutely. And cases like Rupali Devi, you know, they give me hope that it can. You know, they demonstrate a willingness to think outside the box.
Yeah.
To consider the broader context.
Yeah.
And to prioritize the well-being of those who have been harmed.
I think that's a great point to leave our listener with.
Yeah.
The law is a living, breathing entity, capable of growth and change.
It is.
And each of us has a role to play in shaping its evolution.
We can all be advocates for justice, whether it's, you know, by supporting organizations that work to protect women from violence, or raising awareness about these issues in our communities, or just, you know, having these informed conversations like this one.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground today, and I feel like I've gained a whole new perspective.
Yeah, me too.
On domestic violence, jurisdiction, and the power of legal precedent.
It's been a fascinating deep dive, and I always enjoy exploring these complex topics with you.
And to our listener, thank you for joining us on this journey. We encourage you to continue exploring these issues, to stay informed, and to never stop advocating for a world where everyone has access to justice and protection under the law.
Until next time.
Keep learning and stay curious.